All right. Today was the 27th of Adar, the year 5785. The next scheduled class we have is after Passover. So that would be Thursday, we're looking at. Thursday, the 24th of April, I believe. Okay. Now, coming this Sunday is the new Hebrew month, the first day of the month of Nisan, which is the month which Pesach, Passover, takes place. And that is when the Exodus from Egypt, when the Jewish people were redeemed and were actually made into a nation. And according to the prophet Yechezkel, Ezekiel, that is, so to say, the birthday of the Jewish people. That's Passover. And in our generation, though, in addition to Passover being for all of Judaism and for all the Jews back from the beginning being so symbolic and being the beginning of the Jewish people in a certain sense, in addition to that, in our generation, the 11th of Nisan, just 3 days before the festival of Passover, is the birthday of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Melech HaMoshiach. And he was born in 1902. So in honor of that, I would like to go through some of the criterion, some of the laws about Mashiach, what Mashiach needs to do and what he need not do, and how we can identify who Mashiach is up to the point of with certainty. Now, as any topic in Torah, there is the written law, then there is the oral tradition, the oral Torah, the Talmud, and there are many, many midrashim, and then there is the mystic part, the Kabbalah, the book of the Zohar, etc., etc. Now, in order to know what to do actually, or in order to be able to come with certainty to come to a final verdict, for that we have, if it's something which is practical, like do's and don'ts, like commandments, or in the case of Noachites, to know what is actually permitted and what's actually forbidden. For example, the book which was put together by Rabbi Moshe Winner, the Divine Code, Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem. So in order to get to that point, you need to have an authority, a halachic authority, a ruler in Jewish law, such as in any case. Now, when it comes to the topic of Mashiach in authentic, true Judaism, you won't find these laws in the Jewish code of law. And the place that they're found is in Maimonides in the Rambam. Because as I may have discussed in a different class, the Rambam, Maimonides, is the only one actually who took the Torah in its entirety and formulates it into Jewish law. And his 14 books, which cover all of Jewish law, from the belief in Hashem, in believing in God from the very beginning, all the way through every single topic, all the way up until the Messianic era. The name of this book, of this magnum opus, is Mishnei Torah, or it's called sometimes Yad HaChazaka. Now, the Rambam his last subject in the 14th book is the laws of kings. And the last two chapters, chapter 11 and 12, are the laws of Melech HaMashiach. Chapter 11 speaks all about the Messiah, Mashiach, that according to the Torah, who is it, and what does he need to do in order to prove his credentials, so to say, and what need he not do, and what are we supposed to do about it. And chapter 12, the final chapter of the entire Mishneh Torah, describes the actual Messianic era, what needs to happen then, what will happen, and what need not happen. Now, right before those chapters, starting with the earlier chapters, chapter 8, 9, and 10 in the Laws of Kings, from the middle of chapter 8 and the entire chapter 9 and 10, they deal with Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, the 7 Noachite commandments. And being that the Rambam wrote his work, his great work, for the Jewish people, so one might wonder, so then what's the point? Why does he write the Sheva Mitzvahs, the 7 Noachite commandments? Why does the Rambam write them there? If anything, he should have written it as a separate article or as a separate book or something of that nature. And the reason is as follows. As he himself says, the Rambam writes that it is the obligation of the Jewish people and of every Jew that is able to actually influence or to enforce that everyone, all of mankind, all the nations, keep the 7 Noachite commandments. So he's actually writing it for the Jewish people to know what they are and to know what to instruct and how to teach the nations of the world. So that's really how we have the 7 Noachite commandments. Of course, going back biblically, they're hinted to as everything in the written Torah, in the beginning of Genesis, and then in the Talmud, tractate Sanhedrin, and scattered in other places. But to know in detail what actually, bottom line, legally, what are the do's and don'ts, that's in the Rambam and Maimonides. But the Rambam is speaking to the Jew. Okay. After we finish with the 7 Noachite commandments, then he comes to the last topic. And he tells us about Mashiach. Now, the Rambam, in his commentary to the Mishnah, to the Talmud, besides this Mishneh Torah, he also wrote a commentary to the Talmud. Over there, the Rambam formulates 13 cardinal principles that every Jew is obligated to believe, and those are the basic principles of Judaism. And if any Jew does not believe or denies any of those 13, he is categorically a heretic. And they deal with belief in Hashem, reward and punishment, prophecy, and number 12 of the 13 is belief in the coming of the Mashiach, of the Messiah, and number 13 is belief in the resurrection of the dead in the future. So now, it later on became formulated sort of as 13 short declarations based on the Rambam. And there are many Jews that have the custom that daily at the end of the morning services, they actually say these 13 things, each one beginning with the words, Ani ma'amin, I believe, I have faith. And then they mention each one of those 13. Now, because human nature is that we're always hoping and looking towards a brighter future. And we all want to have some sense of, or in one form or another, of utopia, or some type of perfection or good. Every normal human being, I should say, aspires to have a good world, to have justice, to have an abundance of good. And that's really what everybody is looking forward to. I think that's fair to say that. Now, various different religions throughout the centuries have adapted or misconstrued or stolen concepts from Judaism. And sometimes a very slight difference can make a world of a difference. And the difference between right and wrong, and I'd go so far as to say between life and death, maybe be protected, can be what seems to be a nuance of a difference, a very, very slight difference. So we know that over the centuries, there have been dozens and perhaps much more than that, of false messiahs. Perhaps most famous are just one or two religions, but there are many, many more false messiahs. Some of them were actually Jews, some were Jewish, and some were not. So we're going to now discuss what is the true approach and the true belief in Messiah and what he needs to do and what he need not do. I'll try to condense it so that we could do it in this one class, but I have to give a disclaimer before I even begin that there's no way that we're going to cover it, the whole thing. I just want to kind of give a general overview and, so to say, a tip of the iceberg, just to set certain things straight. And again, this is based on verses in the Tanakh and oral tradition of the oral Torah. It's hinted to by Jacob in the end of Genesis when he's blessing his children, and there are a number of places where Mashiach is mentioned. He may not be called Mashiach, but he's mentioned. The Redeemer, the future redemption, is mentioned in the Torah. The Rambam brings 3 proofs from the Bible, from the Chumash, for Mashiach. And Jacob is not one of them. And you can even go earlier that according to Midrash, so right at the very beginning of Genesis, the 2nd verse already has a reference there to Mashiach when it says that the spirit of Elohim, of God, was hovering. That is actually referring to the spirit, the soul of Mashiach. But Maimonides says as follows, and let me paraphrase. There will come a time where an individual is going to arise onto the scene. And he calls him already at that point King Mashiach. The word Mashiach literally means anointed one. Because as we know, that kings, just as the Kohanim, the priests, or certain vessels, need to be anointed with this type of oil or that type of oil in order to inaugurate them and in order to make them have that status of being king or being a priest or being sacred for the use in the Holy Temple. Not everyone has to be anointed. Not all kings have to be anointed necessarily, and obviously priests don't have to all be anointed. It just was initially. But now if a person is Jewish and they're a male descendant of Aaron, the high priest, so automatically they are a priest by birth. They don't have to be anointed. Be that as it may, the word Mashiach, as I said, literally means anointed one, although the Messianic king himself, Mashiach himself, may not need to be anointed. But it's because he's a descendant of the anointed King David. Now, this person's going to arrive onto the scene, and he will restore the original government to its original state, the way that it's supposed to be according to Torah law, which basically means in the land of Israel, the Jewish people living there, and there being a Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court. Every major city should have its own court of 23 members, and then in Jerusalem there's several courts of 23, up until the one and only top Supreme Court of 71 members, and they are the ones which decide Jewish law and determine all sorts of things with regards to the priesthood and the Levites, and in general, Jewish law, any questions which come up. But as far as leading politically, if you will, the Jewish people and their interaction with the nations of the world, etc., that is a type of biblical monarchy. The monarch, the king, being Mashiach. Now, what does that have to do with Jewish law per se? Well, it has a lot to do, because then and only then do all the biblical laws go back into effect. Laws that we have not been able to keep for at least the past nearly 2,000 years, and even more, perhaps. There are many Jewish laws that in order to keep them, it's necessary to have the Holy Temple, the Beis HaMikdash, in its place on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. There are laws that you need to have all the Jewish people residing in the Holy Land of Israel, not in the diaspora. We haven't had that for a long time. The destruction of the Second Temple was close to 2,000 years ago. All the Jews being in Israel, we haven't had that for about 2,500 years. In the middle of the First Temple, the 10 lost tribes. So Mashiach comes, everything is going to be restored. And therefore, the Jewish people will be able to keep all 613 commandments as they apply. All the do's, all the don'ts, which right now we can only keep a small percentage, relatively speaking. And the Rambam throws in a few examples. We're going to have the laws of Shemitah, the sabbatical year, on a biblical level. We're going to have the Jubilee year every 50th year. I haven't had that, at least according to the Rambam, since the middle of the First Temple, which means we only had a couple of them because it's every 50 years. And parenthetically, how it applies to Noachites, as we've mentioned numerous times, the Rambam says in several places in his Mishnah Torah that Ger Toishav, that concept of a non-Jew becoming a resident and having a status of a Ger Toishav, with rights in the land of Israel and rights from the Jewish people towards him, can only be, the Jewish people only accept a Ger Toishav when we have the Jubilee year. So even for the non-Jewish world, for the nations of the world, aside what we're going to get to, the main point of world peace, before we even get to that, just as a side note, for the Bnei Noach that I'm speaking to right now, for the Chasidei U'Masaylam, for you people that are considered the pious or the righteous of the nations of the world, for those of you that are categorically keeping the 7 Noachide commandments, well, today you can't be a Ger Toishav, but as soon as we have the Yovel, the Jubilee year, back into effect, Ger Toishav will apply, and therefore all of you, presumably, will be able to, it's up to you, will be able to join and have the status of Ger Toishav. And that's a whole discussion unto itself, what Ger Toishav means and what the laws are, etc. Now, then the Rambam says in a very clear, and you can call it extreme, but in very unequivocal words, that anyone, talking to the Jewish people though, this applies to Jews, anyone that does not believe in him, in the coming of the Messiah, Mashiach, or anyone who does not anticipate or await impatiently his arrival, is not only denying all the rest of the prophets, but he's actually denying the Torah and Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, no less. Then he brings in 3 proofs from the Torah. I'm not going to get into the details. I'll just mention them very briefly. He does not go in the chronological order of how they appear in the Bible, but these are 3 proofs from the 5 books of Moses. Proof number 1, from towards the end, the book of Deuteronomy, where there's a whole bunch of verses that state that Hashem is going to bring back all the dispersed Jews. There'll come a time where all the Jews of exile will be brought back to the land of Israel. And then he brings a second proof from the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, in the section of Bilam, where over there the prophet, the non-Jewish prophet Bilam, said prophecy about King David and about King Mashiach. And he brings down a whole bunch of phrases from the verses, and he breaks them up. This part is talking about King David. This part is talking about Mashiach, King Mashiach. And then finally, proof number 3, from the concept of cities of refuge, where until now, we had 6 cities of refuge. And then it says that when Hashem is going to expand the borders of the land of Israel for the Jewish people, we are to add 3 more cities. And that has never happened yet. And that's referring to the lands biblically known, going back to the Bris Ben Absarim, the covenant that Hashem made with Abraham in Genesis, in the parsha of Lech Lecha, where he lists all 10 nations. So the 3 that we never got yet are Cani, Kenizi, and Kadmoini, otherwise known as Ammon, Moav, and Edom, Esav. So we never got those yet, and therefore, if we're commanded that we're to add 3 more cities when we get them, obviously we have to get them. Okay. Then the Rambam goes on and says as follows. This is in chapter 11 in the Laws of Kings. He says, don't think that King Mashiach needs to perform any signs or wonders, anything supernatural, or alter or change anything in the laws of nature, or resurrect the dead, or anything like that. He says, not so. And then he brings us a, so to say, historic proof, but it's a biblical, it's a Torah proof because it's from the oral Torah, it's from the Talmud. And what's this proof? So he tells us a story that is recorded. He says, one of the greatest sages ever of the Mishnaic time, he lived during the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, some of you may know the details of his life, very, very fascinating. And if you don't, well, now's not the time to get into it. This great, great genius of a sage, this holy rabbi, Rabbi Akiva. In his days, he and all of the sages of his time proclaimed and announced about a certain individual who the Rambam calls Ben Kuziba. That person's name historically was Shimon Ben Kuziba. Otherwise, he's popularly known as Bar Kokhba. This was a very, very mighty Jew, beyond charismatic, a very, very powerful leader. And this Ben Kuziba, otherwise known as Bar Kokhba, gathered together Jews to join his army, to have a revolt, to rebel against the Romans that were taking control of the land of Israel. And in order to join his army, you had to be beyond brave and strong. And he made a very, very powerful army, and he was a great, great leader, and he was leading the Jewish people into national victory like you can't imagine. Rabbi Akiva became his arms bearer. Normally, a rabbi of that stature, of Rabbi Akiva, would not be allowed to be an arms bearer because that's not proper respect for the Torah that he represents. Furthermore, they would not be allowed to endorse Ben Kuziva on his mission because it was endangering so many Jewish lives. And the only way that he was able to do this, that the sages at that time were able to support Ben Kuziba, was because they maintained that he is in fact Melech HaMashiach. They referred to him as Melech HaMashiach. Now the Rambam doesn't go into all the details. Much of what I just told you is not written in the Rambam. He just says that Rabbi Akiva and all the sages of his time believed him to be Mashiach. Rabbi Akiva became his arms bearer and proclaimed him as the Messianic king, Melech HaMashiach. And then the Rambam very briefly tells us this was so until he was killed by sin. 3 words. Ad shenerag ba'avonos. Once he was killed, it became known that he's not the Messiah. That's the story the Rambam tells us very briefly, just a couple of words, tells us this episode of Rabbi Akiva and Ben Kuziba. And then the Rambam explains. The sages at the time did not ask for this Ben Kuziba character to do any sign or any wonder. Nope. How could they say he's Mashiach? Why can't they just ask him? Make some sign, do something supernatural, like Moses did when he came to take the Jews out of Egypt. Turn water to blood. Do something. Show us you can fly. Resurrect the dead. Do something. They didn't ask him to do any of that. Nothing that Ben Kuziba did had to break any laws of nature. He was super mighty. He was super brave. He was a super leader. When I say super, I don't mean that it went out of the category of nature. So the fact that they acted upon him being Mashiach and they proclaimed him as Melech HaMashiach shows us that Mashiach need not do any signs or wonders, at least not in his initial stage. And then the Rambam says that the general idea is as follows. This Torah of ours, all of its laws are eternal. They will never change. You're not allowed to add or subtract. And many people understand that the Rambam here is hinting to other religions or other individuals, particularly one individual that we're going to get to by name soon, who did just that. They said, this is expired, this is not necessary, this the rabbis made up, etc., etc. And then the Rambam says, and this was taken out of the censored prints that were around for so many generations, but recently in our times, based on the manuscripts and the earliest editions that we do have, various different libraries in England, in New York, there are different places, in Israel, there are different places that we have early prints of the Rambam and we have manuscripts. So now they're reprinting them based on that. And what does he say? Anyone who adds or subtracts, or anybody who shows or explains something in the Torah which is against the tradition, and he takes any mitzvah out of its simple meaning, and he says that this commandment is not to be taken literally as a commandment, but it's just some kind of a figurative message or what have you, this person is certainly an evil, wicked heretic. Okay. Then comes, in a sense, the main one. This is chapter 11 still, and it's the last, what we call halacha, the last paragraph of this chapter. And now he says as follows. And if a king from the household of David will arise, now obviously he can't really be a king yet, because we're talking about so many years that we haven't had kings, so what makes him a king? It's what we would call a catch-22. So what he means is a person who is fit to be king and carries himself or leads as a king, is respected as a king, etc. He arises and he has to be a descendant of the Davidic household. and he is involved in Torah study. He is constantly meditating and studying Torah, and he is involved in mitzvahs and commandments like David, his predecessor, like David, his ancestor, according to the written Torah and the oral tradition. So if you have somebody who's really, really great and he's following the written law, but he's rejecting the oral Talmud, he's out. So far we've described this individual. So number one, he's got to be Jewish. That goes without saying. Number two, he needs to be of the Davidic lineage. Number three, he personally needs to be involved in Torah study and in mitzvahs, commandments, like David. Next, if he will, Yaakov, compel, enforce all of Israel to go in the ways of Torah, and if he will strengthen the maintenance of Judaism, and he will wage the wars of Hashem. That's what biblically the way in the Navi it describes David, King David HaMelech, fighting the wars of Hashem. Then behold, this person is Bechet Katz Mashiach. He is the assumed Mashiach. Once he's done that, that's it. That's all he did so far. It's a great accomplishment, but he did not yet build the Holy Temple. He did not yet gather all the Jews back to Israel. However, he's gotten everybody, he's forcing everybody to go in the ways of Torah, and he is strengthening the maintenance of Judaism, waging the battles, the wars of Hashem, like against assimilation, etc. So at that point, he's Becheskas Mashiach. Continues the Rambam and says, if he did all of that, and he was successful, and he built the temple, and he gathered the dispersed Jews that are in the diaspora, that are exiled and coming back now, behold, he is the certain Mashiach. And then the whole big next piece was taken out by the censorship, as you'll understand. And now he continues and he says, and if he didn't succeed to this point, or he was killed, similar to Ben Kuziba, then it is known that he's not the ultimate one that the Torah has promised us that will come at the end of days and be the Messiah and bring redemption. But that doesn't make him wicked or false, but he is like all the perfect, fit, great kings of the household of David that passed on. Okay, then he says, and also Yeshua HaNotzri, JC, that imagined that he is Mashiach, and he was killed by the Jewish court, Beis. Well, about him, Daniel already prophesied. And he quotes a verse from Daniel, obviously not using JC's name because JC wasn't born yet at the time of Daniel. This goes back roughly 500 years before. And in that verse, it says that there's going to be people, there'll be someone who is going to break out, and they're going to place a visionary, and they will stumble, they will fail. Says the Rambam, is there a greater failure than this? That all the prophets spoke about Mashiach being the Jewish Redeemer and saving everybody and gathering them all back and strengthening the performance and the observance of all the commandments. And this fellow, he caused countless Jews to die by the sword. He caused the Jews to be dispersed and spread out and to be knocked down and to change and exchange the Torah and to mislead and misguide most of the world to serve a deity other than Hashem. Continues the Rambam, But the thoughts of the creator of the world, man cannot understand. Like, why in the world would he allow such a thing? For his ways are not our ways, his thoughts are not our thoughts. And all of these things about Yeshua HaNotzri and of this Yishmaeli that arose after him, we know who that is, referring to Muhammad, are merely to pave the way for Melech HaMashiach and to prepare the world to serve Hashem in unison. Then he brings a verse from Tzefania, famous verse that I'm going to have everyone call out in a clear language, and everyone's going to serve Hashem together in unison. How so, says the Rambam? Well, the world now has become filled with the subject, the words, the discussion of Mashiach, and the discussion of the words of Torah, and the discussion of mitzvahs, of its commandments. And these things have reached very far islands, places geographically far, far away. And many nations that are uncircumcised in heart, and they are discussing, and there's a give and take, and a whole discussion. These say that the commandments are true, they were true, but they've expired and they no longer apply. These say that, oh, they're very hidden stuff, and we shouldn't take the commandments literally. And Mashiach already arrived and revealed to us the mystical, real meaning of what is hidden there. So there's a whole discussion. The world has been talking about Mashiach, right, wrong, twisted, up, down, but it's been a conversation. It's been a belief, even if it's twisted, but at least the concept is there. And therefore, when the true, real Melech HaMashiach will arise onto the scene, and he will be successful and be great and exalted, then immediately they will all retract and realize retroactively that everything that they were taught about this by their forefathers and by their prophets were all mistakes and they were misguided. So basically, the Rambam is suggesting, why would Hashem allow so many years of most of the world being misguided and false religions to take mankind away? Why? So he's saying, because if not, the whole topic of Moshiach, Messiah, and global redemption would be a non-entity, and people wouldn't talk about it. It would be totally forgotten, and it would be such a foreign concept. And then when Mashiach comes, what's that? Who's that? And the whole educational process is just, therefore, it's not on the back burner. It's on the forefront. And it's, even though it's twisted, it's wrong, and even though there were tragedies because of this, but at the very least, the world is discussing and speaking about Mashiach, the Torah, and the commandments. All right, that's that chapter. And basically, if you take it piece by piece, this is a description of, to one degree or another, of great people that we've had in history. And arguably, Ben Kuziba did make it to the point of being Bekeskas Mashiach. That's stage one, where he's the presumed Mashiach. He obviously didn't make it to the end. He didn't make it to becoming Mashiach Bevadai, the certain Mashiach. And perhaps throughout history, we had other individuals that either made it to that point or close to that point or were in the process. Our generation has merited, after nearly 2,000 years since the destruction of the Second Temple, we have merited that this individual, in fact, has come and has accomplished what he needs to accomplish and has brought us up to the full and complete redemption, up to the rebuilding of the Holy Temple and the process of the ingathering of the exiles, of bringing the Jews back to Israel, has begun, and we're in the middle of the process. So we've never gotten this far. And I'm talking about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Melech HaMashiach. And without going into great detail, which I can, would take me well over an hour, I'm going to try to sum up in the next 5 minutes. So bear with me. Number one, we said, of course, got to be Jewish. He needs to be from the household of David. Many people are. Don't think that that's like a huge deal. Say, oh, wow, he's from the house of David. It is, oh, wow. But so are many Jews. If the person is not a Kohen or a Levi, he's not a priest or he's not a Levite, which means he's a Yisrael, the regular Jew, he's got probably more than a 50% chance that he is from the tribe of Judah. And from the tribe of Judah, there are many people that can trace their lineage to David. Not everybody, but people have this. So he is one of those. There's family tree. Once you reach a certain person, well, then that person is known to have had his family tree going all the way back. So there was a great sage, the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, and he, everybody knows, was a direct descendant of King David, and the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach is a direct descendant of his. There are actually other ways as well that the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach comes from King David. Now, anybody who is in the least bit objective and knows anything about anything in Judaism up close cannot deny that the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach is so immersed and so involved in Torah study, like second to none. No one else can compare. And I'm not putting down anybody. There are many people that are very, very diligent, very knowledgeable, and they really study Torah. He speaks literally volumes. There are great sages, and many people put out many, many books of their novel ideas and their teachings, their essays, their thoughts on Torah. The Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, to date, has 40 volumes of his edited talks on all subjects of the Torah, 6 volumes of his edited deep, what we call Hasidic Maimarim, discourse. To date, some 38 volumes of his letters responsive to people, which much of it is Torah thoughts and deep Torah matters. Not all of it. A lot of it is giving people advice and giving them blessings. So it's a mix. And then there are many, many, many volumes. And I say many, I'm not giving a number because there's in English, there's in Hebrew, there's in Yiddish. There's just so much of transcribed talks of his that he never edited. And there's recordings. So basically, no one can say that he's any less than completely immersed and involved in studying and meditating and teaching Torah. And when you study these volumes, I mean, I feel silly having to say this, but it's beyond anyone's, can't compare. And his mitzvahs and his campaigns to bring all the Jewish people to fulfill mitzvahs. He made campaigns. Now we're getting close to Passover. Every local Chabad house has its goal to get every Jew to have handmade, what we call shmura matzah, at least to be able to eat the required minimal amount at the Seder. And when it comes to every Jewish holiday, our goal is to get to every single Jew. The Rebbe Melech HaMashiach's goal, as he says clearly, is that every single Jew perform the commandments. And he doesn't just say it, but he sends out emissaries, agents, to do so. And I can go on and on and on. And then it really started earlier, but at least by 1982, 83, he started the campaign of promoting the 7 Noachide commandments to prepare the whole world for the state of world peace. So basically, he is at the very least B'cheskas Moshiach. And he continues, and his work continues. And then if someone will ask, well, what about the fact that Ben Kuziva didn't make it and was killed? So why can't we say that the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach may have been all of the above up until 1994, when it appears that his physical life discontinued? And the short answer to that is the Rambam, every time he mentions it, says neherag, which means killed. Because if he's killed in battle, that means he failed. But if the person wasn't killed, that doesn't disqualify him. But we're kind of out of time in that. So just let me fast forward. At chapter 12, the Rambam says as well, miracles don't have to happen in the beginning of the Messianic era. And it's a normal, so to say, world. And the only shift is going to be that no one is going to do bad. There's going to be peace. And in the very, very last paragraph, last halach in chapter 12, he describes that at that time, there won't be any hunger, no wars, no jealousy, no competition. And the reason will be because good will be in an abundance. There'll be so much good. And all delicacies, all goodies, will be found like the dust of the earth. And the entire preoccupation of the entire world, not just the Jews, and not just the so-called observant Bnei Noach, everybody's going to become an observant Ben Noach, is going to be exclusively Lodas es Hashem, to know Hashem. And therefore, the Jewish people will be great sages, and they're going to know the hidden things as much as a mortal can. And then he concludes with a verse from Yeshaya, from the prophet Isaiah, that the world, the earth, will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, like the water covers the ocean bed. Okay, with the remaining time, I know there could be a lot of discussions and a lot of questions, which could take us into hours and hours, but let's try to keep it brief, and I'll try to address what I can. Anybody have any questions, please?
James.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah,
James,
ahead.
you go ahead.
Forgive me, I'll defer to the other gentleman.
Pardon?
I will defer to the other gentleman.
Oh, yes, you could go ahead first.
Oh, thank you. Forgive me. Thank you for the wonderful class, everyone, and thank you for being amongst everyone. I was just wondering, in light of current circumstances, I don't know if this is getting ahead of ourselves or myself, but I understand there's a lot of, in Syria, there's a large Jewish, or not, excuse me, a large Druze territory that is looking to forgive me, Gertoshav themselves into attaching themselves with Israel. Could you comment on that for a moment?
Yeah, so I want to be careful I don't want to say with absolute certainty, since I'm not certain and it's a big responsibility. But those types of things, I dare to say, are actual, not just signs, but that's actually showing us that we're so much right, not just heading in that direction, because if you look at the map, where these biblical lands of the three additional pieces of land, they really go pretty far east, and that area that you're describing can very well be part of the expanded part of the land of Israel. And therefore, the fact that they want to be on board is exactly where we're at. That then we're going to have that as part of Israel, and therefore the nations of the world that live in these places will be allowed to continue living there as Ger Toishav.
Thank you.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Sure.
Rabbi, in your opinion, do you think that if the Mashiach does come, would the United Nations still exist, or would it be disbanded?
That's a fair question. It's a good question. And actually, in a talk in January 1992, the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach spoke all about the UN and the good that they were doing at the time, and how what they were doing then, not going to go into the whole thing, what they were doing then in January of 92, and what the US was doing together with Russia, was then President Bush and Yeltsin, was actually the beginning of the fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah that they'll beat their swords to plowshares. So, having said that, the UN could very well continue to exist in a positive way, because he goes into detail when the UN was established, and he really connected very much with Mashiach.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And one more thing, very interestingly, and in that talk in January of 1992, the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach says that the real reason, the deep reason, not the superficial or the surface reason, but the real reason why the UN is in New York is because that is where Mashiach is, in New York.
Wow. Wow.
Not San Francisco, where it originated.
Right.
Thank you, thank you.
Anyone else?
James Gosnell.
Go ahead, James.
Hi, Rabbi Turner. Thank you. Could you talk about whatever you want to talk about, but in regards to how do I phrase this? Sadiqim, a tzaddik, how you can learn from a tzaddik, connect to a tzaddik, and how that differs from something of other beliefs, such as like Shituf. Anything that's on your mind regarding that? It's a big topic, but
Okay, well, that's sort of a different topic in a sense, but I understand what triggers that. Basically, it would be Tanya, the first part of the Tanya, Likutei Amorim, chapter 2. The entire chapter 2, but especially the last piece. That is really what I would say. And now, the difference might seem like it's a subtle difference, or as I said at the very beginning, sometimes a small little thing could be the difference between right and wrong, between life and death, and between heresy and holiness.
yeah, that's now you know why I'm asking that question.
Right. So other religions or cults, whatever that may be, the mistake, again, I'm generalizing, the mistake is usually that they are viewing an individual as an intermediate, like the stars, constellations. So they have a person. It's to put it in the words of Hasidus. There's the connector is a mimutza. The word in Hebrew, the Holy Tongue, is mimutza, which means an intermediate. Now, it could be a mimutza hamafsik, a mimutza which is a separation, and that would be the other religions and heresy, etc. Or it could be a mimutza, and that would be shituf or worse. And then you have mimutza hamechaber, the connector. And that is connecting to a tzaddik, or especially with Hasidus, to a rebbe. The tzaddik is the embodiment of Hashem, and he's transparent, and he is very united with Hashem. Whereas the other case where they actually make a separation between Hashem, the creator, and then they have this individual, which they also claim whatever. I mean, there's different types of belief within the world of, let's say, Christianity or Catholicism or whatever they believe, that he's the son of, or the Trinity, or whatever. You know, one could just be worse than the other. One is not as bad as the other. But basically, they're viewing an individual as a deity, and you can't do that. There is no one or anything that one can worship other than Hashem. People don't worship the tzaddik. You don't pray to a tzaddik. But it's basically chapter 2 in Tanya. And then there is a book which I'm a little hesitant to mention it, because next thing I know, you guys are going to want to learn it. There is a book that came out around 1991, written by a very, very great rabbi, a Chabad Chassid, and it's called Al Tzadikim. And he really explains with all the sources what the Torah view of a tzaddik is, and what we mean when we say that he's the connector between us and Hashem, and he's, so to say, the embodiment of Hashem, etc., etc.
Excellent. That gets me started on that. Yeah, all tzaddikim.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
But again, it's really have to be careful, because it seems like a subtle difference.
Right, and I think you explained that very well. And I think that's what a lot of people need to hear, particularly Bnei Noach non-Jews coming out of Christianity.
Right. But a lot of times human nature is such that when a person gets burnt, so then they go to the other extreme. Like, for instance, if a person was living their life believing in a false Mashiach, so then they go to the other extreme and they don't want to hear anything about Mashiach, because, you know, that sounds so non-kosher to them.
I have a hard time, I think, with that a little bit.
Well, the truth is, the Jewish world, until recently, until maybe 30, 40 years ago, and maybe even less than that, also was like that, because we got burned so many times. The last time that we really, the Jewish world got severely, let on, and then really
illusioned.
Was Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi, which was about 400 years ago.
That's scary stuff. I just started researching that.
Yeah, and after that, that is, I would say, the primary reason why very, very observant and adherent and great rabbis opposed Hasidus and came out so strongly against the great holy tzaddiks of Baal Shem Tov and the Mizrahi Magid and all the Hasidic Rebbes. In the early days of Hasidic the revelation of Hasidus,
Mhm.
it was because they were afraid. They didn't trust this new movement of the Baal Shem Tov and Hasidus. It was too fresh. And the truth is that the way that we explain it in Hasidus, our tradition, is that's precisely why the Baal Shem Tov was born and his soul was sent when he was, because the Jewish people was in a state of,
They went too far to the extreme.
you know what I'm saying? They were unconscious,
Yeah.
right? They lost hope completely, and they wouldn't dare speak about Mashiach in any serious terms. We're, so to say, we're stuck with it in our text, in our davening. We only mention it about 60 times a day, but they said, don't take it so seriously. Just say the words and just move on. And the Baal Shem Tov came to make it real.
I'm detecting that a lot in the writings that I'm currently reading. Like, just even I'm picking up on that. So I appreciate you telling me that. So it's kind of like the pendulum went back to where it was supposed to be in the middle there or whatever. Okay, thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Sure. We are pretty much out of time, I think.
Nick had a question.
Go ahead, Nick.
I just wanted to know, so if we reach this point in history, what's the only thing preventing the full fulfillment of the Messianic era?
Ah, you asked a loaded question. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, there's two correct approaches. There's two sides to the coin, same coin. One side is, and I'm not making this up, this is what the Rebbe, Melech HaMashiach, has said time and time again in 1992. Nothing is left to need to be done. And he went through the checklist. What had to be done? Done, done, done. And he said this many times in 1992. And therefore, he concludes, it is beyond any understanding. It makes no sense. It cannot be, it should not be, and it just makes no sense. Therefore, we need to be expecting it every single moment because it really is about to happen. And the fact that another day goes by and another hour goes by, another week, another year, another decade goes by, that just makes it much more intense that it's about to happen because we need not accomplish anything else. That's on the one hand. Flip side of the same coin, the very fact that it still didn't yet get to the complete finish line, we're not totally there yet, means that there's something that we need to do. But what? You never know. And it's that one act of kindness that's going to tip the scales. Just everybody has to be focused and just constantly do more. Another mitzvah, another good deed, another demand. He says we're supposed to cry out and demand from Hashem and from Melech HaMashiach that we want the redemption immediately. And then he gave a whole bunch of different things that we're supposed to do. And then he said the famous words that he mentioned a few times. And, you know, people are still dealing with how do you implement that and what does it really mean? And that is, he was speaking to the Jewish people. He said, all you need to do now is open up your eyes. Open your eyes and see the true reality. So we're basically supposed to make this shift. And we're supposed to be able to look at the world as a godly world, a world where the redemption is actually present and unfolding. Easier said than done.
Thank you.
All right. So if, God forbid, we're still in this situation of exile after this year's Passover on Thursday night. What did we say the date was? April 24th. That is the next scheduled class. And it looks like we're going to start this new book by Rabbi Yonason Taif. Looking forward.